what I want to do is build upon something that we've already talked about. So we've already talked about multiplying two binomials together. So if we had something like x plus 3 times x plus 4, then we know that we would first multiply the two first terms. We do the FOIL method, first outer, inner last. So x times x is x squared. And then we do the outside terms, 4 times x is plus 4x. And then we do the inside terms, 3 times x is plus 3x. And then the last terms, 3 times 4 is a plus 12. And then we would combine those two middle terms, and we would end up with x squared plus 7x plus 12. Now the factoring, today we're going to talk about factoring. And that is the opposite of multiplying. Basically, instead of timesing these together, we're going to divide them out. So basically we're just doing the reverse process of FOIL. So the factoring of a trinomial is just going to be the reverse process of FOILing this out. So the reverse process means when you get a problem like this is going to be our starting point. We're going to get a trinomial that looks just like this. Check for the leading coefficient. If it happens to be an implied 1, then you know that you can move straight to the parentheses. Mark down the parenthesis spaces automatically. Look at the first term. In this case, it's an x. That's going to go in the first position right there and also over here. Then let's look at the last term. Now here's the key. We got to come up with two numbers that multiply to be 12, the last term. So they have to multiply to be this number, and they've got to add to be this number. And that's kind of the little riddle, and that's the trick or the riddle that we're trying to solve here. So the way that I like to do it is I like to write down 12 and list out the factors of 12. Well, there's always a 1 times 12. That equals 12. We can go 2 times 6. And if I look at the numbers 2 and 6, if I add them together, I get an 8. And that's not going to work right here. I also try the subtraction way because sometimes we have minuses inside this trinomial. So if you were to subtract these, you could get a negative 4 or a 6 minus 2 is a positive 4. But either in all the cases, it's not a 7. So 2 times 6 is not going to work. Can you come up with two factors that multiply to be 12 and add to be 7? What about a 3? If you go 3 times 4 is 12, sure enough, and 3 plus 4 is 7. These are the two numbers that we need. And in this case, the signs have to be plus and a plus because they have to multiply to be a plus 12 and add to be a plus 7. So I'm just going to write down a plus 3 here and a plus 4. And there we go. And it checks out because that's what we had at the very beginning of the problem. So I kind of wanted to show that both ways so that we could see how this works. It's the reverse FOIL process that we're doing. So on our notes, pre-printed on here is a couple trinomials. So let's take a second and try to solve both of these. Actually, there's one of them here that we just barely solved. So I'm going to write it a little bit bigger. X squared plus 7x plus 12. And in fact, let's take a look at this. Actually, we just barely did this one. We know that it's going to be two numbers multiplied to be 12 and add to be 7, or x plus 3 and x plus 4. We've already actually looked at that problem. So let's take a look at this one over here. This one's got a minus in it, and that's good for extra practice. So here we have an x squared minus 11x, and then plus 24. Now in this case, we got to come up with two numbers that multiply to be 24 and add to be a negative 11. I'm going to treat that as a negative. Plus a negative 11 is the same as negative 11. I'm going to keep that number, or that sign that precedes a number, right with the number. So I'm going to write down 24 over here. What are the factors of 24? Well, I can go 1 times 24. I can go 2 times 12. You can go 3 times 8. Any of these numbers look good so far? Well, 1 times 12, that'll give me either a 25 or a 23, depending on where the negative is, or where the minus is. A 2 and a 12, that could give me a 10 or a 14, depending on where the minus is. And a 3 and an 8, that could give me a 5 or an 11. Now, if it were to be an 11, which ones would have to be negative? In this case, the only way to get a positive 24, if that's a plus, then the signs have to be the same. This tells you what the signs are going to have to be. So let me make my parentheses. I could have done that first. Go ahead and put down the x. That's an automatic thing. Now we just got to come up with these other two numbers. So two numbers that multiply to be 24 and add to be negative 11 are a negative 3 and a negative 8, because negative 3 plus negative 8 is negative 11, and a negative 3 times a negative 8 is a plus 24. So I'm just going to put a minus 3 right there and a minus 8, and those all work out. So if I were to FOIL this back through, first, outer, inner, last, guess what I would get? The trinomial. So now we're able to work from the trinomial and factor our way backwards. and come up with the two factors. It's pretty handy the way that we can do this process. Let's look at